never know who I'm going to meet here. I never know what the fucking situation is going to be like. And I felt so good about it, actually, to tell you the truth, because it wasn't like you know, everything else in the city is stereotyped. It's just going towards, you know, with a template. This place, wild place. You never know what the hell's going to happen here. So I was really appreciating that, actually, today. And in fact, next week, we don't know, but we might have to move this to, you know, as far as like, you never know what's going to happen next type thing. Next week, we might have to move the cinema to the front room for 1 week, because they're going to be building a toilet in the back here somewhere. And so that's not for sure, but that's going to be an experiment. So we'll see what happens. But I am going to be jumping around town like always, and I will just tell you very quickly what I'm doing this week. Next screening is going to be on Friday. Day after tomorrow, I'll be at the VG Terrain in a place called the Budapest Living Room, dead right at the very beginning of the Fondle Park, kind of just on the side a little bit. Great little space. We have free screenings there. On Friday, we're going to be having a tribute to a Czechoslovakian filmmaker that died last month. His name was Jan Nemetz. And he was making films, especially in the 60s and into the 70s. But in the 60s, he was making these dynamite films during the Czech New Wave, where all the possibilities were opening up, and everybody was making music, and everybody was making a new kind of cinema and a new kind of culture before the Russian tanks came in and kind of like dampened things for quite a couple more decades. And so Jan Nemetz's films are hardly ever shown. But there's only 3 films that exist with English subtitles. And we're going to be showing all 3 films on one night. But the whole thing adds up to 2.5 hours, so it's possible. I mean, it's going to be okay. And so it's, you know, it's like a tribute to this visionary filmmaker. And if you want a flyer for it, just ask me after the film, because there's flyers for that event. The next screening after that is going to be on Monday at the New Anita. New Anita, a great place for live music. Every Monday we turn it into a cinema. And on Monday at the New Anita, I'm going to be showing a film called La Drôlesse, which is by a director named Jacques Dillon, a French director. And thank you. And Jacques Dillon. But outside of France, nobody basically knows who he is. And especially this film, La Drôlesse, his debut film, his very first film. I think it's probably his best movie. And once again, in France, some people know about it. Outside of France, nobody knows about it, basically at all. And so we'll have the New Anita. And what's great about Dillon, the director, Dillon, is that he can work with children, you know. And this is a movie about like an 18 or 19-year-old retarded guy who kidnaps a 12-year-old girl, and then they start having this kind of very strange relationship that develops out of this kidnapping. But the director is able to work with children in such a fantastic way. And that's what's kind of really striking and amazing about the film. The girl in the movie, 12 years old, she'll die of cancer within 2 years after this movie is made. So she only made 1 movie in her life, but she even has a cult following in France just from this one performance. So we have a really special screening of that on Monday at the New Anita. Then on Tuesday, I'll be at Filmhouse Cavia. I'll be showing a Japanese film by Akira Kurosawa, and I'll be showing the movie Ran. You know, Ran is one of his epic masterpieces that he made. Many people consider it to be the last masterpiece he made in his entire career. You know, it's based on King Lear from Shakespeare, but it's transformed to feudal Japan, and it's, you know, everything is visually explosive in this movie. Great film, and it's a film that has to be seen on a big screen in a cinema. So that's on Tuesday at Filmhouse Cavia. Then on Wednesday, with all luck, we'll be back here at Under the Bridge, and we're going to be showing a movie next Wednesday called Billy Jack. Billy Jack, I discuss. Oh yeah, the book. Where's the book?
Behind you. Behind you.
Yes,
behind you.
Right here. A fucking book. So a book. So Cecilia and I wrote a book called Seances. It's about underground cinemas. It's about underground culture. We came out with it about 3 weeks ago, and it's like I say, you know, it's a motherfucker. It's like you can see it. There's a lot of shit in there. And it's also about Polish movie posters. It's also about Amsterdam in the 1980s. It's about cinema. It's about you know, all in everything. It's about making bridges between all these kinds of things. And you know, if you want to see it, look at a copy after the film. There's copies here to look at. If you want to buy a copy, the book is non-profit. It's a labor of love. It is self-published, and it's 10 euros. We worked fucking hard to make it as cheap as possible. And that was, you know, the cheapest possible, 10 euros. So maybe think of, but in any case, next week's movie, Billy Jack, I discuss in this book a little bit. That's how we got there. Billy Jack, 1971, made in America, starring a guy named Tom Laughlin. This movie is absolutely, absolutely legendary for a lot of different reasons. One reason is that it's about Native American Indians. And all the films in America, basically, are on the wrong side of history when they talk about the Native American Indians. This is one of the very few films ever come out of the United States that is on the right side of history. It's taking the side of the Native American Indians. It takes place on an Indian reservation. Shows what the situation is about. Second thing is what's important about the film is that it was an independent film, and it's one of the top grossing films, one of the biggest box office smashes of all time in the history of cinema, in the history of America. And we're talking about an independent film. We're talking about a film that's not like fucking Star Wars 7 or something like that, that has a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign backing it up and selling this, you know, shoving it down people's throats. We're talking about a film which was an independent film made by independent artists, and they were able to smash the box offices. Only time in history this has ever happened. And what else is important about the film? What is it about? The film is made in 1971. It's a time capsule of all the ideas that are happening as the culture is changing, as the world is changing in the 1970s. So it's about a guy named Billy Jack. He's been fighting in the Vietnam War. He comes back to the United States. He goes to this native, he's a half-breed, he's half Indian. He goes to this reservation, and then, you know, like there's a bunch of, you know, white, you know, right-wing idiots all around, of course. And these people are being, you know, the Indians are being treated like shit, just like they're being treated like shit today. Still, nothing has changed. They're being beaten up, they're being harassed, they're being pushed around, they're being, all this kind of stuff. So the question is, do you fight back? Do you use violence against violence or not? That's the crucial, that's the core issue of this movie. But once again, a film that is like legendary. It was able to do things that no other film was able to do. Only that one movie, and it's hardly ever been shown in Europe. You know, so it's a good opportunity to be showing it here in the Bridge next Wednesday. So that's what's coming up for the next week. Tonight we have a film called Django, made in 1966, directed by Sergio Corbucci. He was born on December 6th, 1926, and he died on December 1st, 1990. He started directing his own films in 1962, but Django, the movie we're going to see tonight, was his real first success, actually. And he would continue making films in this vein a little bit. I mean, he was making all kinds of films, but he would also be continuing to make spaghetti westerns. The Great Silence, which I showed not so long ago, is an example. But he was also doing things like films about the Mexican Revolution and the so-called Zapata westerns that were happening. And so he was like, you know, all about how Mexico and the United States were fighting, you know. And so basically, he was a very diverse director. But his spaghetti westerns are fucking fantastic, and tonight is a great example. In the UK, this movie was banned until 1993, and I'll talk about the reasons for that in a second. This movie has spawned, created sequels, over 30 sequels, and we're talking about sequels that are just like, have the word, the name Django in the title. But if you even look at the films that are influenced by this film, like El Mariachi by Rodriguez, or Takashi Miike's Western Django, these films are all, there's so many movies that were heavily influenced by the vision of this film, and not just by the title. This movie stars Franco Nero, and And he's great. He's 23 years old. They're trying to make him look a little bit older. They told him not to shave. They tried to put some wrinkles around his eyes to make him look like he's like in his late 30s or something. But he's 23 years old when he makes this movie. The main actor. The director only had a really small amount of time, because all these films were made on no budgets and on really small time frames. So basically, he had hardly any time to write the script. Him and his friend, worked on it together, and and they decided, okay, because I'm just mentioning this in case you ever wanted to write a script, because this is one possibility. They first of all came up with the ending of the movie, and then they started writing the movie backwards, right to the beginning. So it was written in reverse. The studios, the studios, as yeah, I gotta be able to read my notes. And like I said, he was concerned about this whole issue about what's happening with the relationship between Mexico and the United States. You can see that in the background of this film. And he's just like, okay, he's writing the script with his friend. He's going into the history books. He's going into history, and grounding this movie in some kind of history. He also, because there's some people in here that are a little bit like the Ku Klux Klan in a way, so he went back and looked at old documentary newsreel footage of the real Klan and how they existed in the 1930s. So that was the background that he did for the film. Because this film had to be shot in winter, it was shot in December, the landscape was different than he had thought it was going to be. He was expecting a Sergio Leone kind of dry, dead of summer landscape. But they had to shoot in December. So basically what we have here is a landscape of streets which are totally muddy, filled with mud. And the set designer wanted to clean it all up and try to make it look like it was summer or something like that. And the director, Corbucci, basically said, leave it. It's going to give the movie even a stronger atmosphere. And make it in an atmosphere that's very different than any other spaghetti western. As spaghetti westerns, I'm hoping that you know, but if you don't know, spaghetti westerns were generally films that were made by Italians, shot in Spain, about Americans. Try to follow that. This film opens up as like any kind of typical Western, and the main character, isn't first seen going across the landscape on a horse, but he's walking. We have a main character that's walking and walking and walking. This is a very strong first distinction between other spaghetti westerns. The landscape, like I said, isn't like a desert, but it's this muddy gray, full of rocks and dying grass. The town he comes to is just a hole, and it seems to have nothing in it except for maybe one bar and a whorehouse or something like that. We're talking about really at the bottom of the barrel. The name Django comes, the director chose the name Django after the French jazz musician, Django Reinhardt. And Django Reinhardt couldn't use half of his fingers in one hand. And that comes into play during the movie. So remember that. Django Reinhardt's the great jazz musician, couldn't use his fingers. So. Speaking of appendages like fingers, there's an ear-cutting scene in this movie, which Tarantino was heavily influenced, of course, for Reservoir Dogs and that whole scene that comes out of that. Django had the reputation of being one of the most, that's why it was banned in England. When it came out, it had the reputation of being one of the most violent films ever made in cinema history. Yeah. Since then, Saw 7 is like, blood sports from beginning to end. It's a very kind of different thing. But when this film came out, it was a real shock. And a lot of critics really were against this movie, just on terms of violence that the movie was portraying. The last thing I want to say is that the soundtrack is by a guy named Louis Bacalov, and the soundtrack of this movie is also legendary. Tarantino used it for Django Unchained, I believe. And in the one thing that's really nice and really interesting about soundtracks in Italy in the 1960s and 1970s, we're talking about some of the best soundtracks ever made. all in Italy, and a lot of times they were just for no budget movies. These great composers were working for almost no money, making these outrageously lush, wild, crazy, fantastic soundtracks for like, police movies or spaghetti westerns that basically, like I said, had no budget whatsoever. That kind of died in the 80s. So let's jump into the movie now. It's about an hour and a half long. I'll be hanging around afterwards. If you have any feedback or any comments or any thoughts about the film, I would love to hear it. And thanks for Julian and Cecilia for helping set up the cinema tonight.
Woo!
Thanks for coming.